Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Paul, and in this ReadyGamingTech.com video, we're going to be discussing as well as analysing tech news which, as usual, has popped up in the past 24 or so hours. Hopefully, you're having an amazing day. We have a ton of stuff to get through in today's video. Primarily, we're going to focus on Nvidia and the next generation of Ampere, because Nvidia have detailed tons of things regarding the Ampere architecture. But I want to start things out with a small update for AMD and the second generation of RDNA. In yesterday's video, I had an exclusive with information from a couple of very reputable sources from myself that have been very accurate in the past. Obviously, I won't attribute specific stories to them, but they have proven to be extremely reliable. And in that video, I basically outlined the performance targets of RX 6000, release schedules, and other bits and bobs. But since that video's gone live, I've been contacted by a couple of other folks, and some of this information does match up with things I'm hearing through the grapevine, but these individuals have contacted me anonymously and they are not regular sources. I want to throw it in here purely as more of a bonus. As I said, today I had just intended to cover Nvidia, but these emails have come in, so I will cover them. I will stress that they are not from normal sources of mine. I cannot verify this information, and normally I say to take any rumours with a pinch of salt. In this case, I would suggest taking it with a truckload of salt, and furthermore, take it as good theories rather than a leak. With that said, one thing I'm pretty positive on is that AMD are cracking down on leakers. This is actually one of the things that I was told in an email I received today, and this actually matches up very well with things I'm hearing from a couple of other people. I'm even hearing that some folks at AMD get told one thing, and then a different group will be told something else. Just for example, this is obviously not accurate, but let's just say I was to tell Bob and Tom ABC, but I told Tom ABD, and the actual real thing would be ABD, but Bob has ABC, and then Bob tells someone else it's ABC. You can then find out who leaked that information. So that's one thing I'm hearing. AMD are being ultra paranoid internally now for leaks. This is actually very similar to Nvidia. This is one of the reasons it's much harder to get Nvidia leaks than AMD have been in the past. AMD were kind of leaking like a sieve a couple of years ago, but things have gotten tighter and tighter and tighter. They're actually not briefing board partners as early as they used to as well. That's another thing. And yeah, it's quite interesting. So that's one thing I'm pretty positive is right. The second thing is this individual has said that the clocks have been largely decided now. Yesterday I mentioned that the specs were still in flux. There was a possibility that they were basically going to change in terms of the clock frequency up until the end of this month. But this person is saying that now Ampere has shown off, AMD are basically decided on the clock frequency within, let's say, 1 or 2%. But David Wang from RTG, Radeon Technologies Group, have said that they want to focus on efficiency and want to focus on basically having better performance per watt over the previous generation. This doesn't mean, though, that if you're an AIB, you cannot crank things higher. So the AIBs that, create really nice custom cards like the Power Colors and Sapphires or whoever, they're free to still do that, and you, as an end user, can, overclock however you want. Apparently the drivers are, at this point, stable, but with some caveats. One thing I was told is that there was, I'm going to quote this tiny bit verbatim, there was a hard fault caused by 12_2 math inconsistency, but it's since been resolved. This obviously is a DirectX 12 issue, apparently. Again, I cannot verify this information, and yeah. Another thing that a couple of folks have wrote to me at this point and told me is that there is some type of DLSS tech, but it's not like Nvidia's. It's basically some type of, I guess you could say, a bit like checkerboard rendering for the PlayStation with Radeon image sharpening, but done with lower level precision. So as we know, the Xbox can handle 4 and 8-bit operations. Apparently, that's how AMD are going to be running this on the next generation RDNA GPUs. Again, I cannot be certain that this is true. As for IPC, I'm hearing that it could be about 10% to 15% performance per clock. As for IPC, it's very difficult, of course, to get such measurements, simply because different applications, different games, that type of thing can leverage things differently. I'm hearing around 10%, and this figure as well is something that Moore's Law is Dead told me in DM he's been hearing, so credit to him there. 10% is what he's been hearing. I've also been hearing around 10%. Some people are insisting it could be a bit higher. However, I will stress that when it comes to IPC, especially on graphics, what are we referring to? Are we referring to pure, geometry work? Are we referring to a specific game engine? What's going on? It's very difficult to kind of get those figures down. And I am hearing as well that RDNA 2 does clock higher. Again, there was another leak that I had from someone I know is pretty damn reputable. They told me that RDNA 2 is extremely power efficient and the performance is pretty damn impressive. The problem is over around 2200, 2300 megahertz, that's when you start having issues. This matches up, of course, what Cerny at the Road to PS5 event said, that over 2230 megahertz they've capped the GPU, because what you start having is logic issues. And then I was further explained to me that what happens is you start to have, I think it was CU bus issues. Basically, the logic starts breaking down, things start to fall over. So theoretically, I guess it's going to be about 2230, 2250 is about the highest you can expect these GPUs to hit comfortably. Maybe a bit higher, depending obviously on Silicon Lottery, that type of thing. I will again say all of that information I am way less certain of than the information I put out yesterday, but I figured I'd throw it in here anyway, and we can see if any of it turns out to be true. I'm personally taking it as well, that's nice. We'll see, to be honest. But again, I'm just throwing it in here for your... you can decide whether that's true or not. I will personally hold my breath on that one. So I wouldn't hold my breath on that one. But what I am excited to discuss with you is the next generation of RTX 30/GeForce 30. Nvidia have further outlined several of the upgrades to the technology of the next generation of GeForce cards. And as we are likely aware of at this point, the 3070 in particular is getting a ton of media attention. It's like $500 and it outperforms the 2080 Ti. And there are several reasons behind this, and we're going to go into some of them in this video. I will be much deeper diving into the Ampere architecture when I get samples and start doing reviews and stuff, and obviously I'll do the same for RDNA 2 as well. But for this video there are a couple of things I'd really like to touch on. The first is the improvements to hardware-based ray tracing. I think Turing did a fairly respectable job for hardware-based ray tracing, given it was a first try, but it wasn't at the level of performance that you could really say was what we were hoping for. Let's just be really honest. It was, however, okay for upsampling, say, if you had a 2080 Ti from 1440p to 4K on something like Control, but you had no way in hell that high resolution was going to run natively, and titles like, say, Quake RTX was just, very demanding. But Nvidia have made several improvements. They claim it's up to 2 times the ray/triangle intersection performance, and they also, of course, mention dedicated hardware. We'll look at this slide first, Depending upon the game, it's 1.55, 1.6 times if you look at Battlefield, which apparently is the worst case scenario. With some games which are full path tracing, interestingly, such as Quake 2 RTX and Shadow of the Tomb Raider being faster, Quake 2 RTX and Minecraft, wow, I'm having one of those days, which is maybe about 1.75, 1.8 times performance increase over Ampere. A big issue I have is there's no specific numbers and frame rates and whatever else, but applications such as Chaos, V-Ray, and Blender do extremely well here. We're looking at just a smidgen over 2 times the performance scaling, which again is very impressive as a leap from one generation to the next generation. So the question is then, how did they achieve this? Well, as always, the answer is not necessarily 100% simple. Nvidia have detailed some of this, and basically they've made large changes to the actual RT cores themselves. So, for one, they have changed the actual ray tracing cores by utilizing MIMD RT cores, which is multi-instruction, multi-data, rather than single-instruction, multi-data. And this means that the second generation of RT cores essentially changes the way that RT cores function, or there's a lot more functionality built in. As I mentioned, you've got now purpose-built MIMD execution units, and basically the hardware stack when it comes to BVH has been, well, it's just quite an uptick. Furthermore, there's a second component that that has been added into Ampere, and this is a block which interpolates triangle positions over a timescale. And this, of course, works in conjunction with the triangle intersection unit. Nvidia seem to be claiming that this is particularly useful with something like motion blur. So basically, as an object is in motion, if you look from one frame to a second frame, it's not going to have moved a whole lot. In fact, it scales actually pretty linearly if you think about it, because although if you're going, let's say, from 30 FPS to 60 FPS, you've only got half the amount of time to make draw a frame, but this also means that you've got less of a change from one frame to another. So it kind of means that rather than throwing out all of this data, it means that when blurring is being used, you can basically reuse some of this. I would also be interested to see whether this could be used in the future more effectively with more stuff. In other words, whether this would be a situation where this data, which is from the previous frame, could be used to also improve the performance of the next frame without motion blur. Nvidia aren't implicitly saying that, but I mean logically you could do it. But again, they are not stating this implicitly. We also have improvements to the third generation of Tensor cores. There's, of course, a history with the Tensor cores. They first debuted with Volta, and then obviously they became extremely important for Turing, and now they're even more important for the Ampere architecture. And the performance difference here is quite massive. It's up to 2 times-ish performance. Interestingly, though, the number of Tensor cores per SM is now just 4. It was previously 8. But if you look at the number of FMA operations per Tensor core, well, I think it's fair to say that the leap is pretty damn massive. Again, we'll pick on the GA102SM for the 3080. You can see that previously it was 64, but now you can do either dense or sparse, get to that in just a second, of 128. And you can therefore run, in terms of the total number of FMA operations per SM, either 512, or if you're using sparse, 1024. So what exactly is sparse? Well, the idea here is that you basically trim out, as we can see in this specific slide, parts of data which are not necessary for the operation. Theoretically, this means that you're not affecting the accuracy of it at all, but you're affecting the speed that it can be processed. Naturally, this is going to be very important, not only for keeping the size down, but also improving the performance too. Okay, now let's get onto the performance side of things, which I'm sure most of you probably care more about than, all this stuff with the, ray tracing cores. And ultimately, the RTX 3070 is being kind of pushed as a 1.6 performance loop at 1440p, and they are comparing this against a 2070. So if we look at Borderlands, this by the way is 1440p. They are stating all of this is maxed performance with an i9 with 1440p i9 max settings. They're stating that Borderlands on the 3070 is getting just over 80 frames a second, so we can say that, say, 85, something like that. And this is compared to the 2070, which is the grey bar, slightly lighter grey bar, which is, let's say, around 50-ish FPS. Minecraft with RTX on, obviously that is a massive increase. We're looking at, with Minecraft, just over 60 FPS with the 3070, whereas with the with the 2070 and with the 3070 we're getting way north of over 100 frames a second. It looks to be about 105-ish FPS, and Control is the same thing. There's quite a large gap between them. And we'll look at one other result here. I don't want to go through every single game because there's just too many of them, but Nvidia have also released the same images for the 3080. Again, if we look at Control, this is running, however, at 4K, so it's obviously considerably more demanding. Control, we're hitting at 3080, with the 3080 about 80 FPS. With Minecraft, with the 3080, we're getting just a smidgen under 80 FPS. That's obviously with RTX on, so that's almost double the frame rate with Minecraft, and we're going from, let's say, high 40s with the 2080 up to about 80 FPS again with the 3080. And Borderlands, which is actually quite a demanding game, funnily enough, it's 60 FPS-ish with the RTX 3080, and it's probably just about mid-30s, something like that, 30-ish, 33, something like that, with the RTX 2080. Now, I do know that people are going to say, well, why aren't they comparing it against something like the 2080 Ti? And I do get that, but Nvidia previously have actually released performance graphs with their own internal testing with Control on a 2080 Ti. Again, this is with DLSS on as well as off results. So with the 2080 Ti with DLSS on, we're looking at about 80 FPS. With it disabled, it's just a smidgen under 50 FPS. And while Nvidia did not test with these graphs a 2080 vanilla, you can actually just take the 2070 Super and slightly increase the performance, and that will give you kind of roughly whereabouts it is. So honestly, the 3080 is still an extremely impressive card, even against the 2080 Ti. The 3070 will also win too. We also have some Borderlands 3 results. This is courtesy of TechSpot. With the 2080 Ti, this is at 1440p. It scores 90 frames per second, that's average, versus their results of 71 FPS. Once again, that's average of the 2080. And if we crank the resolution up further still, so this is 4K, 47 FPS again for the 2080 Ti, and the 2080 vanilla is scoring 37. So according to these results, Nvidia would still drastically outperform their previous generation flagship with, let's say, the 3080, but it seems clear here that Nvidia are more focused on trying to show you generation over generation leap, so the 3070 versus the 2070, the 2080 versus the 3080, and so on. I've already previously in a couple of other videos detailed the SM units of Ampere, so I won't go over that again because I think it's fairly common knowledge at this point. But I think that's just about it for this particular video. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. The normal stuff, like, share, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.